June 23, 1942. Picture this. British spotters at an airfield in South Wales are watching the sky through their binoculars. Suddenly, a German fighter plane breaks through the clouds and starts coming in for a landing. This should trigger every alarm. Guns should be firing. Chaos should break loose. But something feels off about how this plane is approaching. The Focke-Wulf 190 touches down gently on the grass strip and rolls right up near the control tower. The engine goes quiet. The cockpit opens, and out steps Oberleutnant Armin Faber from one of Germany's top fighter squadrons, removing his flight helmet and scanning the area. Then it hits him like a punch to the gut. Those planes on the tarmac? Not German Messerschmitts. They're British Spitfires. Those uniforms coming his way? Not Luftwaffe grey. They're RAF blue. The gut-wrenching realization washing over Faber is mirrored by the shock spreading through British intelligence officers all across southern England. Germany's deadliest fighter plane, the one that had been tearing through Allied squadrons for months, the mysterious beast that seemed unbeatable in the air, had just been hand-delivered to Britain by a confused pilot who thought he was touching down in occupied France. The intelligence treasure this represented was absolutely massive. But what would happen when American test pilots got their turn with this machine would completely transform how Allied fighters approached combat with German aircraft for the remainder of the war. For 8 solid months, the Focke-Wulf 190 had been the stuff of nightmares for Allied airmen flying missions across the English Channel. Combat reports first mentioned it in September 1941 over France, and right from that initial encounter, pilots understood they were up against something truly formidable. Squadron leader J.E. Johnson from the Royal Air Force, who would eventually become one of Britain's most successful fighter aces, barely made it back alive from his first brush with the FW-190 in early 1942. This thing was quicker than our Spitfire Mark Vs both in straight flight and when diving, he later recalled. It could change direction faster than we could. The weapons it carried were absolutely devastating. For the first time since the war started, our fighters were completely outmatched. The numbers told a grim story. During the first half of 1942, RAF losses over France shot up dramatically. Veteran pilots who had made it through the Battle of Britain were getting knocked out of the sky by an aircraft they simply couldn't compete with. The FW-190 could escape from chasing Spitfires by diving away, outmaneuver them when rolling, and tear them apart with cannons shooting 20mm explosive rounds. When American pilots started showing up in Britain flying their P-47 Thunderbolts, the warnings came immediately. Never try to outturn the FW-190. Don't attempt to match its roll rate. Stay away from diving contests. The list of things to avoid was extensive. The list of tactics that actually worked was frighteningly minimal. Intelligence officers were desperate for information. What gave this aircraft such incredible capabilities? Where were its weak points? How could Allied fighters actually beat it? But getting real answers meant getting your hands on an actual FW-190. And every one that had been shot down over Britain was too wrecked to provide useful insights. Then Armin Faber made his massive navigational blunder. Before I go further, I'm really curious where you're tuning in from and what you already know about the FW-190. Leave a comment down below and tell me if this story was new to you. And if you're enjoying this kind of deep dive historical content, I really hope you'll hit that subscribe button. These videos require extensive research to get all the facts straight, and knowing you're watching makes all that work worthwhile. Oberleutnant Armin Faber wasn't some rookie fresh out of flight school. At just 21 years old, he had multiple confirmed victories under his belt and was viewed as a talented pilot within Jagdgeschwader II, the prestigious Richthofen fighter wing. On that fateful day in June 1942, he was flying escort duty over the English Channel, providing air cover for German bombers hitting targets along the coast. Everything went according to plan until the flight back, somewhere over the water. While aggressively maneuvering during a fight with British fighters, Faber lost his bearings. Clouds blocked his view of the coastline. The sun's angle fed him incorrect directional information, and when he emerged from the clouds, seeing green fields with an airfield in view, his brain jumped to a straightforward but disastrous conclusion. He believed he was over France looking down at a German airfield. He was actually over Wales, staring at RAF Pembry. The error seems unbelievable looking back. But getting disoriented in combat happened more often than military officials wanted to acknowledge. Pilots flying at extreme speeds through cloud banks, executing high G-force turns that restricted blood flow to their brains, occasionally lost track of which way they were heading. Faber had executed a 180-degree turn during the aerial combat and simply hadn't registered it. When he touched down and spotted the Spitfires, Faber tried desperately to fire up his engine again and get airborne. But RAF ground crew were already closing in on the aircraft. Within moments, he was captured, and British intelligence specialists were inspecting the pristine Focke-Wulf 190A3 sitting on their airfield. The instant response at RAF Command Headquarters was almost giddy excitement. IR Chief Marshal Sholto Douglas, leading RAF Fighter Command, instantly ordered the plane moved to the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough for comprehensive testing. Every component of the machine needed to be recorded, measured, and studied. Within 2 days, the F-190 arrived at Farnborough, where Britain's leading aviation specialists began their inspection. What they discovered explained every frustrating experience Allied pilots had been reporting from combat. The aircraft represented a triumph of no-nonsense engineering. Where the Spitfire embodied graceful aerodynamic principles, the F-190 represented raw, focused functionality, but sheer engine power only told part of the story. The F-190's most lethal characteristic was how fast it could roll. This machine could flip from one bank angle to the opposite, faster than any Allied fighter in service. This seemingly technical detail was actually game-changing in aerial combat. When a Spitfire attempted to mirror an F-190's rolling movements, the British aircraft simply couldn't maintain the pace. The German pilot could reverse direction, establish firing position, and get shots off before the Allied pilot could respond. Eric Brown, a British test pilot, flew the captured FW-190 extensively and instantly, grasped why Allied pilots were getting killed. The control surfaces for roll were responsive and light across the entire speed range, he documented. You could maneuver this aircraft through the sky with minimal physical effort. The Spitfire demanded strength and skill. The F-190 reacted almost instantly to pilot input. The weapons advantage was just as striking. The F-190A3 mounted 4 20 mm MG-151 cannons plus 2 7.92 mm machine guns. A brief 2-second firing burst delivered more destructive force than a Spitfire Mark V could produce in 10 seconds of continuous fire. And the weapons were positioned in the wings near the center line, generating a concentrated firing pattern that was lethal at typical combat distances. The diving capability explained how F-190s routinely escaped from pursuing Spitfires. The German fighter's greater mass and superior aerodynamics allowed it to outdive everything the RAF operated. Pilots attempting to chase an FW-190 through a steep dive could only watch as the German aircraft accelerated away. But the evaluation also uncovered vulnerabilities, and this is where the intelligence gained became strategically invaluable for Allied operations. The FW-190's radial engine, despite its power, suffered cooling difficulties at higher altitudes. Beyond 20,000 feet, the aircraft's capabilities dropped off significantly. The engine labored in thinner atmosphere, and pilots documented power loss and temperature problems. In contrast, the Spitfire's Merlin engine, engineered for high-altitude flight, actually gained efficiency as altitude increased. The substantial weight that made the F-190 an excellent dive bomber also reduced its agility in extended turning engagements. The aircraft could outroll a Spitfire, but couldn't outturn one if the fight went on. If an Allied pilot could trap an F-190 into a sustained horizontal circular fight, the tables turned. Most significantly, American engineers found that the FW-190's controls became remarkably heavy at elevated speeds. In a dive beyond 400 miles per hour, the pilot required considerable physical force to pull up. This created a moment of vulnerability. If an Allied fighter could stay with an FW-190 through the initial dive and catch it during recovery, When the German pilot was wrestling with heavy controls, successful attacks became possible. British intelligence immediately started circulating tactical guidance to RAF units, but they also took a step that would prove essential for the air campaign's success. They brought in American test pilots to Farnborough to experience the captured WWII firsthand. In August 1942, U.S. Army Air Force pilots reached Farnborough to study Germany's secret weapon up close. These pilots would bring back knowledge to American training facilities that would end up saving countless American lives. Major Cass Howe, among the first American pilots to fly the captured WWII, produced a comprehensive report that reached every fighter group getting ready for European deployment. His conclusions were direct and focused on practical tactics. The WWII will defeat any Allied fighter operating below 20,000 feet, assuming the German pilot understands his aircraft. How documented. Our edge lies in altitude. Above 25,000 feet, our P-47s and upgraded Spitfires hold superiority. Push them higher and we prevail. Allow them to control low-altitude engagements and we lose. This single intelligence insight fundamentally reshaped American fighter operations in Europe. When P-47 Thunderbolt squadrons started flying missions in 1943, their strategy emphasized high-altitude engagement. Bomber protection formations flew at maximum altitude. Fighter sweeps operated above 25,000 feet whenever conditions allowed. When German fighters rose to engage, American pilots would climb higher, compelling the WWIIs to follow into thin air where their engines struggled. The captured WWII also shaped American aircraft engineering. Technical experts at Wright Field analyzed the roll rate superiority and started modifying P-47 and P-51 control surfaces to enhance responsiveness. The WWII's weapon arrangement influenced American concepts about firepower concentration. Even the cockpit design, which German engineers had refined for combat effectiveness, affected American fighter development. But perhaps the most valuable takeaway came from realizing that the WWII wasn't some invincible superweapon. It was an outstanding aircraft with particular strengths and identifiable weaknesses. Allied pilots who had been mentally defeated by the 190's fearsome reputation now possessed concrete data about how to engage it and emerge victorious. By the end of 1943, the tactical balance had shifted considerably. American P-47s and P-51s were fighting F-190s at high altitude where Allied fighters possessed the advantage. RAF Spitfire Mark 9s with enhanced Merlin engines could compete with the F-190's performance across most altitude bands, and pilots from both sides recognized they were operating different aircraft designed for different conditions. The victory ratios started favoring the Allies. F-190 losses increased as American and British pilots applied the intelligence extracted from Faber's captured machine. German pilots observed that Allied fighters had stopped making the tactical errors that had enabled the WWII's early success. Oberleutnant Josef Pips Priller, a highly successful FW-190 ace, noted in late 1943 that American pilots had obviously analyzed the aircraft thoroughly. They understand not to chase us through rolling maneuvers. They force altitude on us where our engines struggle. They've adapted, he recorded in his mission notes. The captured FW-190 stayed at Farnborough for the entire war, functioning as a baseline aircraft for assessing new German versions as they emerged. When the FW-190 D9 Dora, with its inline engine, debuted in late 1944, Allied intelligence instantly compared it to Faber's captured aircraft. Understanding how German designers had resolved the original version's high-altitude shortcomings. Following the war, aviation researchers estimated the consequences of Faber's error. The intelligence derived from studying the intact W-190 reached thousands of Allied pilots through tactical documents, instructional films, and actual flight demonstrations. The information influenced aircraft engineering, tactical methods, and mission planning across multiple air services. Captain Eric Brown, who flew more enemy aircraft than any other Allied pilot, would eventually observe, Faber's navigation mistake provided us with the key to unlocking German fighter philosophy. Every tactical strength the FW-190 had was documented, and every vulnerability was targeted. That one aircraft likely prevented more Allied casualties than any other intelligence achievement of the war. The situation's irony wasn't missed by German intelligence when they discovered what had occurred. One Luftwaffe officer remarked, "We invested months attempting to capture a Spitfire Mark 9 intact for analysis. The British faced no such challenge. We flew our premier fighter straight to them." Armin Faber remained in a prisoner of war facility in Canada for the rest of the war. He survived and went home to Germany, living until 1976. Luftwaffe documentation indicates he was initially held responsible for losing the aircraft, but subsequent evaluations recognized that combat disorientation could affect any pilot. Germany's Focke-Wulf 190 marked a revolutionary advance in fighter aircraft when it first appeared in 1941. For almost a year, it dominated Allied planes through better performance and creative engineering. But that edge dissolved immediately once Allied engineers could study the physical machine. No aircraft is unbeatable. Every design requires compromises and balancing acts. The FW-190's low-altitude superiority came with reduced high-altitude capability. Its exceptional roll rate carried a penalty of heavy controls at speed. Its impressive firepower added mass that decreased agility. Once Allied pilots grasped these trade-offs, they could take advantage of them. Today, the FW-190 is recognized as one of World War II's exceptional fighter designs. Aviation collections showcase remaining examples as achievements of German technical expertise, but the aircraft's legacy is forever connected to the intelligence breakthrough that exposed its characteristics. In the intricate mathematics of wartime superiority, one pilot's brief disorientation over the English Channel transformed Germany's secret weapon into an instruction manual. The FW-190 that Armin Faber mistakenly brought to Britain became the aircraft that showed the Allies the path to victory. The principle resonates throughout military history. Advanced technology is important. Better intelligence is more important, and occasionally, the most significant triumphs don't come from crushing attacks, but from small errors that hand your opponent precisely what they've been frantically searching for. The FW-190 might have stayed mysterious, an unbeatable adversary that continued destroying Allied pilots through psychological impact as much as technical excellence. Instead, it became an educational resource that every Allied pilot examined, absorbed, and finally overcame. One directional mistake, one landed aircraft, one intelligence goldmine that altered the air war over Europe. That's the story of how America acquired Germany's secret fighter, and that's how one mistake changed who controlled the skies.